Python-based Jupyter Notebook was created to illustrate how to use the FAIRshake API using a technology called Core API. Core API is self-documenting and illustrates how to use it through the documentation. You can select the source code of interest, and Core API illustrates how you might execute a given query. The dependency required is Core API CLI. First, we import Core API, instantiate a client, and request the schema from the API/Core API endpoint. The Authentication API is a REST service that enables us to create and authenticate accounts with FAIRshake without the need to go through a user interface, though you could also go through the user interface. Here we create a test username and password and register ourselves. Looks like we've already registered. Let's create a different user. There we have it. Now that we've registered, we can log into our account with auth, login, create, and using the username and password we set before. We can test this by attempting to execute auth user read. All elements expose themselves in the same way with a common set of attributes for search and identification, with a few extra attributes distinguishing each element. Here is the gist of these data models. Essentially, projects, digital objects, rubrics, and metrics all inherit from an identifiable. The identifiable has things like an ID, a URI, a minid, a URL, a title, description, image, tags, and authors who registered these elements. Queries can be made by providing any of these parameters. We'll return a subset of the database which satisfies those parameter constraints. You can explore more of this filtering on the Core API endpoint. Let's list all the projects currently in the database. Of course, this will be paginated. We see we have a lot of test projects because this is a test database. Let's create a tool. Now that we've created a tool, we should really be able to query the tools. Now let's create a project. Now that we have a project, let's create a metric for which we can evaluate this project. With this metric defined, we can now register a rubric which asks with that metric. Let's create an assessment. Now that we've assessed our digital object, we can obtain its score. It's now time to display the FAIR insignia with that score. An insignia client library was created with the build SVG function, which accepts a container to build the SVG into and a score dictionary as in the form that is reported by the score list endpoint. We can construct one in this Jupyter Notebook by creating an element, a container, for the insignia.